Welcome back. I'm your host, Renita.
And I am Jermaine.
And today we're going to talk about your business, Barrett & Associates, how you went from employee to owner, just the background, how you got started and all that.
Great. Yeah, good conversation to talk about and something good to for everyone to hear.
Okay, so I remember when I first met you, of course, we talked about, what do you do? And you said you worked in debt collections.
Right.
Of course, I didn't completely understand what that was. I just knew that I had a few collectors calling my phone, and I didn't know all the details. So first, tell us a little bit about what debt collection is and like what that industry is kind of about.
Okay, so as we all know, I'm pretty sure whether it was yourself personally or your mom, aunties, or someone,
My mama.
you've always had, everyone has always heard of someone on the phone calling them a debt collector.
Right.
Basically, debt collections is the process of pursuing payments of debts owed by an individual or a business. So basically, the collection agencies that I work for, basically we would collect on debt, whether it was deficiency loans on credit card debt, auto deficiency loans. There's so many other plethora of other things that happen. But anytime you get credit available, given to you, and you don't pay it, then basically it goes to a debt collection agency. And I was a debt collector, so I was one of those people who actually get on the phone to call you to retrieve the funds that are due.
Our favorite kind of people. Okay, so go back to a little bit of when you first started in debt collections and kind of what brought you to that field.
Okay, so a while back, obviously we still haven't talked about why I was incarcerated. One of these podcasts we will talk about that. But I was incarcerated. Obviously, when I got out, it was tough trying to find a job. Obviously, with a criminal record, a felony on your record, a lot of jobs won't hire you. So in looking for jobs and so forth, I was trying to find out, where I can find a job, where I'm going to find a job, how I'm going to do this, being turned down by a lot of even regular jobs. I remember even like fast food jobs at one point being turned down, looking for sales. I always like something in sales. But and then eventually I came across debt collections. So initially I was like, what? These are people who call people on the phone. How the heck am I going to be able to do this? But the cool thing is I started at a company and I was just a legal verifier where basically it was skip tracing work where I had skip tracing tools. You put the social security number in this skip tracing tool. It gives up friends, family, and relatives. So I didn't have to call anyone, but I just had to skip trace and find new numbers and find new information, whether it was place of employment and so forth. And that's how I got in collections, because that was a job where I could actually get paid more than minimum wage, and there was a possibility where we can make commissions. I heard about making commissions, and I didn't have to have a degree, and they didn't do background checks, thorough background checks, where it would stop me from getting the job.
Okay, so that's makes sense as to why you went with that route.
Right.
And then, of course, like when I met you, I remember you worked at Barrett & Associates.
Right.
You were doing it at home
Right.
in Ohio, and then when you came back here, just talk a little bit about when you started working for Barrett & Associates, how that came to be and all that.
Okay, so ultimately this is what it is. First of all, I want to give a shout out to David Barrett. He is a guy who I've known in the debt collection industry for over 15 years. He's a pretty cool dude. And he taught me a lot of what I knew with regards to collections. But in the after that job where I was skip tracing, eventually I worked and I ended up making it to where I was a collector. Unfortunately, that job folded. And so then I had to find a new job. And in less than 2 weeks, I saw an ad in a place called, I don't know if I should say the name, but Absolute Resolutions Corporation. I ended up going there and started out working there.
I don't know if I should say it, but I'm going to say it.
Right. And so at that company, I started out as a collector, but I was in a different department. I wasn't on the regular collections floor. It was the contingency department. And that's what contingency basically means is with a debt collection agency, you have accounts that they actually purchase. So they'll buy them pennies on the dollar. Yes, I said pennies on the dollar. And then they'll own the debt, and then they can collect it on their own. And then they have contingency, which is where a company actually has it. For instance, like a medical, let's say, for instance, like a medical bill or something like that. An agency from an actual medical company may contact you and say, hey, we have these accounts. We need you to collect them for us. They're not going to sell it to us at pennies on the dollar. We collect it at a percentage of whatever they negotiate with that company, and then we make a money that way. And that's how I started out. So at Absolute Resolutions Corporation, I was working doing that. Then, and this is why I have to explain this. So then there was this hoopla about this new collector who was coming. And everyone was talking big about this guy, saying like he's like the best collector ever. And all this stuff. And that was coming from management, particularly this one guy. He was a vice president. I can't believe I can't remember his name. He's going to kill me because he's my Facebook friend now. And I can't believe I'm drawing a blank. But nevertheless, he really big upped this collector. And this collector was David Barrett. And so he ended up coming to the office. And at this time, I was on the contingent side. He was actually a collector. And I remember, the first day, nothing happened. The second day, all of a sudden he got like a pop. I'm not sure exactly how much it was. I'm just guess it was around like $5,000. And me personally, when I heard he got the pop, feeling some kind of way about him coming, I was just like, a blind squirrel finds a nut anywhere. And he didn't really say anything. He just was like, okay, he was sitting down. Next thing you know, maybe about an hour later, he got another pop. And an hour later after that, he got another pop. And so then he said something to me. I forget what it was, but he said something like, this is not luck or something along those lines. And I remember sitting and thinking and saying like, okay, yeah, this guy's a real deal. I mean, in less than, I believe it was about 2 weeks, he out-collected the top collector at the spot. So all the hoopla that came around him being there was sort of kind of true. And so being the type of person that I was, as I was sitting on the other side, at that time span, I think I was in management. I was like a supervisor or something. And I remember overhearing him talk about his commission. And I think he had like a commission check of like $3,000 or something like that in that first month. And I thought, wow, $3,000 is more than what my base pay is. And I'm over, I was over like 15 collectors. And I was just like, what the heck? He's making that plus his base pay, which I didn't know what it was at that time. But I'm like, dang, how's he doing that? And so me being who I am, I remember sitting down in the office with the vice president and saying like, hey, sit me next to that guy. I want to sit next to who was David Barrett. I said, let me sit me next to this guy, and I bet I'll collect just as much, if not more, than him. But I wanted to learn what it was that he was doing. And so eventually, through a lot of stuff, it was, a lot of pulling teeth and so forth. Finally, I got to sit next to this guy and I learned from him. And when I sat down and I learned from him, one of the things that I noticed is he worked his butt off. So a lot of times when we were joking in between calls and stuff, he was just sitting at that phone with that phone to his ear and making the next call and the next call and the next call. Secondly, he was just very smart at his ways of, getting the money and so forth. So to make a long story short, obviously after sitting with him for some time, me and him ended up being the top 2 collectors there. And my mind started rolling again. And I thought to myself, you know what? We're averaging about 25 to 30 grand collected for this company, but we're only making, 4 or 5 grand. And I thought to myself, what if we collected the 25 to 30 grand for ourselves, for our own business? That'll be way better than, doing it for this company, less of the stress and all of that type of stuff. So, sitting down, I remember talking to David and was like, hey, Dave, I'm thinking about starting my own business. What do you think about that? No, actually, it wasn't start my own business. It was going to work for another person. So I found someone online who was letting us work basically from home, but he, instead of we had a goal. You had to hit a certain number. It was like 14 grand. And then after 14 grand, everything over 14 grand, you got to keep 20% of that. With this guy, the new guy that I found online, he basically said that from $1, he'll give you 50% of whatever it is that you collect. Or no, I'm sorry. It was 30% of every dollar amount that you collected. So in my mind, I'm thinking, shoot, if I could collect 25 grand for him and I keep 30% of that from $1 is way better than the option that we had. So I remember telling it to David. At the time, he had a family and so forth. He didn't really want to do it. And I did. But then after some convincing and so forth, I was like, and then eventually we can branch off into our own thing. We both end up doing that. I'll save the story on that with how it happened. But we both end up leaving that company and starting our own companies. I started J. McNeil and Associates. He started Barrett and Associates. And so obviously working for this guy, we collected some money, and then within starting our own companies, J. McNeil and Associates, the difference between me and him is as we would make money. I remember the first time sitting and in 3 days I made like $9,000. And that was all owned money, and that was money for the month. And I remember thinking like, dang, I don't even have to work anymore. $9,000 is a lot of money. And in 3 days, normally at the other job that I had, I could go a whole month and not even get close to that. But I did this in 3 days. I was only averaging about 4 or 5 grand at the other place. And I thought, wow, this is so much better. I'd rather do this. Now, fast forward a little bit. So David had Barrett and Associates. I'm pretty sure he was doing those kind of numbers. But the difference between the both of us is after my 3 days and I made my 9-10 grand, I was done. He kept working and kept investing into his company, and I didn't. But that's eventually how we started our own companies. And then eventually the person who we were buying accounts from, which was the same guy who's the vice president, and he's my Facebook friend. I can't believe Mike? I can't. No, it's not Mike. I can't believe I can't remember his name. I almost want to look on Facebook and look for him. But I can't remember his name. He's going to be crazy. I mean, we did all kinds of things together. He taught me a lot of stuff. But nevertheless...
I thought you just recently, before the pandemic, went to lunch with him or something. But I can't...
No.
Not him?
No, I didn't go to lunch with him. But anyways, maybe he might not even want his name said. But nevertheless, he was a vice president, at that time. But we were buying accounts from him, and he started his own company. And I guess something happened in his company. It didn't really work out. And that's the only person I was buying debt from. Oh. And so once he dried up, and because I wasn't doing what David was doing at the time, David, not only was he buying accounts from him, he ended up getting in the field of collections, and he was buying debt from other people. He was finding other people, finding other clients. Me, myself, once that one person dried up, it was done for me. And so eventually I couldn't keep collecting because I didn't have any accounts to buy, and I didn't get any contingent clients. So eventually I ended up talking to Dave and then going to work for him. So I was able to bring the accounts that I had, and then I worked for him at Barrett and Associates and J. McNeil and Associates. It was only a sole proprietor. I didn't know anything about LLCs or anything. I could have been in a lot of trouble under J. McNeil and Associates. So it was sort of kind of a blessing in disguise, even though I didn't get to continue with J. McNeil and Associates, and I ended up working with Dave.
Okay, so you're now at Barrett and Associates. You're collecting. You've transitioned from working at home to going back to their office. Mm-hmm. So at what point did you think to yourself, okay, I want to go from just working here, being an employee, to at first being part owner?
So the reality is, at the time, because I already owned my own company, my thought process was, well, I'll work for Dave, I'll make up enough money, and then eventually I'll go back and start my own company where I'm, where I can buy and sell accounts on my own. But obviously life hits you and a lot of things change. So I worked with Dave before I even went to Ohio. So I worked with Dave for about 2 years before them. I probably worked with him for about 5 years total. And then I ended up going to Ohio, and then I worked for him there, but I rarely worked. But thank goodness, he just kept me because I was a commission-based only collector. So it didn't hurt to not have me. It wasn't like he was paying overhead or anything along those lines. And then when I got back from Ohio when things went bad there. I ended up coming back to San Diego. And then that's when I met you, and I was working at home. And then he ended up opening an office. He had an office, and eventually I ended up going there and working. Now, so there was a time frame of about 3 years where I was barely making any money, just enough to pay the bills and so forth. And then when I got back to San Diego, I started making more. I was, finally making a little more money. And because we were 1099 employees, I thought, wow, I'm gonna have to pay taxes. So what can I do? And from advice within the company, and I think Dave as well, he was telling me to save 10% of everything that I made, and you'll be fine. So that's what I did. So over the course of that 1 year of working with Dave, when I got back from Ohio and I wasn't playing around, I was going really hard each month. I saved 10% of everything that I had. And at that time span, I wasn't thinking anything as far as owning my own thing or doing anything. I was just an employee, a 1099 employee, which is considered like a employer. And I was just making money and trying to do whatever I could to, cover bills, because I was in a lot of debt. I had a lot of credit card debt and a lot of stuff that I needed to pay off at that time.
Okay, so let's talk about now how you went from, you saved up all this money, so then how did you go from that to being part owner?
Right. Okay. That was the question you asked originally. So I had to give that backdrop with regards to that, just so that people understand.
Okay.
So basically, this is what happened. And this is why I always tell people in general, opportunity comes a lot. And a lot of times people say, you just get lucky. Or you're lucky. And for me, that acronym stands for laboring under correct knowledge. So basically, because I saved that 10%, tax time came around, and thank goodness to tax write-offs and so forth, at the end of taxes, I end up having a large chunk of money left over. And I wasn't thinking of buying into the company or anything along those lines at that time span. I just had a large chunk of money, so I knew I had money in case some type of opportunity came up. And I was ready to, obviously pounce on that and to take advantage of that. And so I remember sitting down at my desk and, collecting when I was working for Barrett and Associates. And then, I remember, David, he was transitioning. He had, another business, and he was transitioning into 2 other businesses. Debt sales basically is what he was doing. And the collections aspect of it was becoming a problem for him. He was just hating the overhead. He was losing money, is what he would say every time when we would talk about the finances and stuff, because we were close. Even though I was still his employee, he would explain a lot of stuff and was just like, man, this thing is, becoming a headache for him. And, obviously dealing with the employees, me in particular, and the other employees, it was sort of kind of tough on him. So I remember sitting down in my cubicle and making calls, and I was in commission. I know I was going to get a nice commission check that month to add to the money I already had saved. And I thought to myself, you know what? Maybe I can help David out. Maybe I can buy, half the company, and and then that way I can take over, and it'll make it easier for him so he can focus on his other businesses, and we will run it together. And so I thought of that, and then, I started thinking about how much money I had, how much the company would be worth. And probably a couple days after that, I went and sat down with David, and I told him, hey, I want to meet with you. And I explained to him what it was that I was saying. I knew that there was a need. Like we talked about with your business, you found a need in your niche. And I knew there was a need. I knew he needed somebody to handle the day-to-day operations there. And so, after talking to him, we came up with a figure, and I ended up buying half the company. And so I went from a collector to a part owner of the company.
Right. Okay, so you're part owner. How long between that and then when you transitioned over to being complete owner? How long was that?
It was probably about 6 months to 8 months after becoming a part owner. I remember he moved his office to the next office. There was a lot of change that happened in that aspect. I mean, you have to think about it. I mean, at one point I was a collector with the rest of the collectors, and we're joking and laughing. And yeah, I was the top collector there, but we're all on the same
The dynamic
field.
definitely
Right.
changes when you become the boss.
Exactly. So then I go from that to becoming a boss, and I learned a lot at that time span. First of all, I was really bad with dealing with people. It's almost like, and not like I'm some Michael Jordan or LeBron James of collecting, but you know, when you're good at something, a lot of times it's hard to teach someone else how, you know, the work ethic and so forth comes from doing that, because you're dealing with different personalities. And I was sort of kind of like an A personality. It was just like, it's simple. Just sit down, make the calls, and you're going to make money. It's just what it is at the end of the day. There's no excuses. If you sit down in that seat, you dial and you smile, you're going to make money. And so I, you know, obviously, you know, my number was a little higher. I would always collect $5,000 to $10,000 more than, you know, the average person in the office at the time. And so when I transitioned to being part owner and I'm teaching people how to do what it is that I was doing, then you start realizing, and I start seeing what David was talking about as far as the headache. And nothing against anybody who worked at that time span. Obviously, I won't use any names or anything along those times, but you're dealing with personalities, and everyone's personality is not like yours. And so that was a very big adjustment. Number one, because I was a collector and now I'm the owner. And so now I'm telling people who was sitting next to me and joking with me, now I couldn't have that type of relationship with them. And then number two, understanding the different nuances within the people and understanding that, you know, things are going to be different. And so it was sort of kind of tough learning that curve.
Okay, so I mean, of course, you had to learn all that and transition through that. And before becoming complete owner, right now you're just co-owner. You're dealing with the day-to-day. Of
Right.
course, you know, you're learning the different personalities in that aspect. And then you're deciding, or what happened where it was like, okay, David was like, Jermaine, I want you to take over completely, or did you go have a conversation with him? What was that like where it switched from you being co-owner to just full owner?
In all honesty, it wasn't the best situation. So what start happening is because when someone's, it's just like any transition within a business or anything along those lines. When someone's used to a certain way and then you come and you completely change that whole way of things going, what ended up happening is I think we lost like one collector. He ended up quitting. We had some other collectors, and a lot of it was because of the way that I was reacting to the people. So those of you who some of you guys are Facebook friends that were under there, I apologize because I just didn't know what I was getting into at the time span. But there were a few that left, a few that, you know, just didn't want to work under me. They would rather have worked under David. And so through that transition, there were a few that stayed and, you know, that I helped out with, that I got along with, and there was some that I just didn't get along with and so forth. Plus, like I stated before, a lot of the connections and so forth. When I became part owner, obviously I'm dealing with the clients, but it's different when, you know, I can still say, hey, I'm under the umbrella of Barrett and Associates and with David. And so I remember even some of those clients, you know, being referred to me, I'm calling them who Dave's been dealing with for years. And they were just like, oh, he's no longer in the company. No, you know, I've taken over the company.
But I'm talking specifically, like, how did that transition? Like, what steps did you take to go from part owner to owner? Like, was there more money involved? Like, what had to happen, like, more like to go from A to B?
Yeah, so basically after all, sometimes I go on tangents. So basically after we lost a few people and so forth, I sat down, talked with Dave again.
Okay.
Went over some more numbers and all of the stuff with regards to the business itself, and we came to an agreement, and I ended up taking over the rest of the company.
So you guys just felt like it would be better for you guys to just kind of go separate ways.
It was. Yep. So, and it wasn't even in bad blood. Me and him are great friends till this day. It's just after that happened and the transition, I didn't think he expected that the way things to happen, and I didn't expect it. And so eventually, after talking to him and so forth, I acquired the rest of the company.
And then you kind of went into this, but the differences between being an owner and an employee, I think you shared that, just kind of
Right.
like the relationships that you had
Right.
with your coworkers versus now your employees.
Right.
That definitely changes. I think that it's hard sometimes for people to see you in a different light.
Right.
And they don't really take you seriously. I
Right.
think that's another thing that happens. Like, what? Who is he? Like, he
Right.
was sitting here right next to me. Now
Right.
he thinks he's the boss.
Right.
Like, so I'm sure that was hard for them too. And just like, you know, you learning them in that light
Right.
was different.
Right.
Okay, so maybe explain a little bit what was, maybe you did this as well, but the hardest part of the transition, just from going from an employee to the owner. I mean, you were already an owner before, but I think
Right.
that I would assume it would be different now that you have people under you and all this. And
Right. Well, before, it's different. Yeah. If I'm the owner, when I had J. McNaughton Associates, I got up to about 4 employees, and we're working out of my house, and that's a whole nother story. But to go from employee to owner at this time span, it was a big difference because for so long I was so used to just being responsible for myself. It's like, hey, make sure my accounts are in my queue. Once they're there, I'm gonna make my calls, I'm gonna make my money, and it's simple. And when I became owner, then not only did I have a desk that I had to collect on my own, but obviously I had to help others. And so, within any ranks, just like school or anything like that, there are people who need more help, and then there are people who need less help. And at the time, of all the collectors, maybe 85% of them needed more help. I was hiring new people and so forth. And so just delegating my time because I barely had time to make calls because I was always helping other people on their calls. And it becomes so tough because you want people to be like you, but they're not like you, unfortunately. And so that transition, I never really got a grasp and a hold of that. And that became very tough. So yeah, when I was an employee, it was just about me. When I became the employer, then it was like about everyone else and less about me. Trying to implement what it was that I learned and instill that in other people. And it was pretty difficult.
but of course, you've had employees since, and do you think it was easier when you met them at that place? Like when you met them now, you're the boss. This is your company, and so when they've come in, or do you think you still have those challenges?
Well, number one, debt collections in general is a revolving door. There's probably, in most collection agencies, I'm pretty sure there are a lot of people out there who may be listening. The reality is you have like a core of like 5 solid collectors, depending on how big your company is. And then everyone else is just a revolving door. And so initially, when I did it, if I would have done things a lot different, if I'd have been a little more understanding and opening towards the employees that were there at the time, I don't think it would have been too tough, just because a lot of what I was doing, even as a collector, people, how is this guy collecting the amount of money he's collecting? And if anyone opened up, I would basically share with them what it was that I was doing. So even though I wasn't the boss within on that collections floor, I was sort of kind of like a leader who people sort of kind of went to and asked questions and so forth. So that wasn't the difference. It was just once I owned it, then something changed in my mind. And it was like, now me being selfish at that time, I was thinking, this is my money. So when you're collecting, if you're not doing it right, you're messing up my money. And I wasn't looking at, these people have jobs and lives and so forth. What can I do to sort of kind of cater the best scenario to where we're meeting in the middle? And that's where I was horrible. And so that's the big change. Just caring, understanding, treating people like human beings. I still have a problem with that. You say that till this day with the way that I come across and how
It's the
my
tactfulness.
message is. Right.
There's, and like you said, I think you said it best, everyone is different.
Right.
That's why I always admire teachers, because I remember working in Keone's class, and there's so many different levels of kids, and adults are the same way. You have those people who just need you to hold them by the hand,
Right.
and other people who think they know it all,
Right.
and other people who are somewhere in the middle, and just
Right.
kind of figuring that out.
Right.
Well, in closing, I wanted you to share with those who are listening, give them your best advice for if there's somebody who works at a smaller company or even a larger one, and they have hopes and aspirations to go from employee to owner. Just give them a few tips and some advice that would be helpful.
Number one, like we've had in the podcast before, I recommend you guys go look and listen to that, is your goals. Setting some goals. The reality is, if you set some goals for yourself, first of all, you have to believe that you can do whatever it is you're doing. So if you want to go from employee to owner, regardless of whether it's owning that company or owning your own company, you got to first of all believe that you can do it. So you got to have the mindset first to say, okay, you believe you can picture yourself being an owner. Number two, you got to set some goals in order to do so. And, within setting those goals is obviously capital. You're going to need capital regardless, whether it's credit, whether it's your own cash, whatever the circumstance is, you got to have capital to get a business off the ground and to get it up and running. And then within that confinement, your goals of what it is and what you see yourself, 5-year goal, 10-year goal, with regards to your company and so forth. So if you want to go from an employee to an owner, those are the things that you're going to have to do.
What about work? You gotta put in that work.
Right, of course. I mean, as we already know, even religiously, faith without works is dead.
Right.
If you don't put in the work, you're not gonna be able to get whatever it is that you're trying to get. And sometimes that's gonna be sweat equity, and sometimes that's gonna be, work where you're actually trading your hours for dollars. But what you do with that money, it's not how much you make, it's how much you take. And that extra money, whether you're going to buy a pair of new shoes or buy new clothes or traveling and so forth, you're going to have to sacrifice those things in order to do that. Because one of the things I didn't mention is when I got back out here, we have said this in other podcasts, I didn't have a car for, the first 5 or 6 months when I met you. And it wasn't because I couldn't get a car. Ultimately, it was just, I was trying to save every penny. And within that confinement, I ended up constructing a deal and getting like a $2,000 or $1,000 older car, like a Nissan Sentra, like 97. And I drove that, and it was embarrassing driving that. And it was a bucket car, but those were the sacrifices that I had to do in order to save up the money to be able to do what you want to do. So you're going to have to sacrifice and work hard.
Another thing, I don't know if this is enough to mention, but I think that it's important because you said it, is just being confident to go to the owner and having a relationship and dialogue. I think that is important because sometimes people are so scared because they seem so far removed, but they're people as well. And so to have that relationship, because you never know what the need is, like you said. You have no idea if they're even wanting to still keep it, but no one's reaching out and saying, hey, I got this for you. Or, you could easily go from employee to part owner with just one conversation. So I think that's also, important.
Yeah, that's very important. Obviously, having that open lines of communication, because you never know. And that's a thing. That's something that I always struggle with, too, with teachers and so forth. Just keeping to myself and not saying nothing. But if you're not in the loop of what's going on, how would I have ever known that he was frustrated and didn't want to handle the day-to-day business there? Reality is probably we would all got fired eventually if I didn't ever talk to him or
just shut it all
figured
down.
it out. And then obviously I had the money that I saved up, so I had, it was sitting there. So save your money. You don't always have to buy the latest this, the latest gadget, the latest this and that and that. Save that money and trust and believe. When you're in position, when opportunity comes and you're in position to make a move, then you can do that. Because I'm pretty sure there were people who were working there who thought, oh, man, there were a few people who were like, oh, man, if I'd have known your company's for sale, I would have bought into it or I would have done something. And so, that weighs in as well.
Awesome. Well, I think this was a great conversation.
Yep.
I learned a few things myself, so I'm sure those of you who are listening will learn a lot of things as well. And we just appreciate you guys listening, supporting us. Go to our YouTube. You can tell them all the things.
Okay. So, books, dreams, and financial things. YouTube is growing. Thank you for subscribing. If you haven't subscribed, go and subscribe to that. Our Facebook page, Books, Dreams, and Financial Things, as well as Instagram. And another thing that she does not promote enough, I think, and we're going to promote it every time on this channel, is if you're looking at losing weight, you don't have time to go to the gym, because you're busy with your kids or you're busy with life.
Right.
Frugally Keto. Check that out. www.frugallyketo.com. If you need some coaching, she can do that for you. She has a beginner's ebook that is great. It's, the pricing is not expensive at all. And if you want to advance, you can get some coaching from her. There are 2 ways that you can do that. But go to the website, check it out. Ask questions, anything along those lines, and help you lose weight. With the new year coming and with these holidays about to pass, we know that there's going to be some people gaining some weight and they're going to need to lose some weight.
And I'm here to help you.
She's here to help you out with that. We love you guys. Be great.
We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.